President Biden gave a forceful speech and made clear that democracy is under threat, not just abroad, but right here in the United States. In front of both chambers of Congress, the president reminded lawmakers of the January 6th Capitol attack in that very room 3 years ago.
History is watching, just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you were here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. America stood. America stood strong, and democracy prevailed.
Joining us now is Mo Elleithee. He is the executive director of the Georgetown Institute of Politics and Public Service. And MSNBC political analyst Brendan Buck is here. He is the former press secretary to former Republican Speaker John Boehner. I feel like this is now the late night crew.
Yeah, this is late night because
love it. Yeah. So it's a thing.
The drinks are flowing. Just
okay, Brendan Buck. Yeah. You have advised a number of speakers who have sat in that very chamber behind a president giving that speech. What did you make of Speaker Mike Johnson? And you know, he had some nods, he had some smirks. I don't think I saw him stand up. What did you make of his performance?
Yeah, I mean,
John
Boehner would turn to Joe Biden and say, look, we're not standing up all night. Like, they don't want to do that. They don't want to be part of the show. What was very clear, though, is Mike Johnson did not really have control over his members in the way that he was trying to get. And I think what Republicans need to realize is these moments where you're engaging with the president up there don't work out well for you. The president has the structural advantage. I think they think that if they just go at him, he's just going to melt up there. And that clearly hasn't happened. Last year, they got into a back and forth with him, and Biden won that. This year, clearly, Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to bait him into something, and he won that moment. And that's probably the moment that sticks out probably to me the most.
Well, because she showed up as a provocateur, and he showed up as the president.
Exactly. And he's standing up there. He has every, the imagery. He's higher than them. He's got the camera on them. Every advantage that you could want there. And he took the moment and given that she probably believes that he's old, senile, and can't do that, she was probably surprised herself that he was able to handle that moment.
Right, because the performance was a huge part of this.
I want to get your thoughts, though, before we get to Mo. Overall, what did you think of the president's delivery, his approach? Coming out strong, not even allowing the speaker to introduce him, which was, I think that's the first in the history of State of the Union speeches. But clearly the president had an agenda in his head that he wanted to get through, something he wanted to convey. What was your take as someone who's been in that chamber, working with the speaker, knowing the protocols, and how presidents generally kind of perform?
There's a lot of conversation tonight about it being a partisan speech, and a lot of people taking issue with that. I think it's okay to say it was a partisan speech. Like, there's no doubt about that. He went after his actual opponent, which is, like, a thing I've never seen before. But it was, I think, the right tactical decision. So we talked a lot going into this speech. How was he going to balance firing up the base and extending the open hand to the Haley voters? That's hard to do both. You kind of got to pick one. And I think picking the one about firing up the base was probably the more urgent need that they had. And so it was right to do that. And you're probably actually not going to win over Haley voters by being a soft, gentle Democrat. You're going to win over Haley voters by making the point that Donald Trump is such a big threat to this country that you just can't do that. So I think it was the right way to go about it. Was it an amazing speech that we're going to remember for a long time? No. Did he deliver it very smoothly? No. But again, expectations have been so lowered about how this person can, function that it, very easily cleared that bar. So I think it was a big success.
I think some of those assessments are very subjective and open to interpretation, as we can tell just from the number of people we've spoken to tonight who I think did feel it was an impressive speech, did feel that his performance far exceeded expectations. And I think it's important to contextualize all of this, Mo, in the week that was, because this was a huge race reshaping week, right? You have Nikki Haley drop out. You have Dean Phillips drop out. This very much crystallizes as a two-person race, which I think speaks to your point, Brendan, about the fact that the president and his team understood that going into tonight's speech, that in many ways the general election starts in a very clear way right now. And so there were contrasts that they were trying to draw.
100%. I mean, look, where I think I disagree with Brendan a little bit is I don't think this was purely a base consolidation speech. I think this was a speech that was actually maybe not reaching out to Nikki Haley voters, but to the independent voters that he's been struggling with a little bit lately. Why? Independent voters like the idea of protecting a woman's right to choose and investing in women's reproductive health. He hit on that.
Hard.
Independent voters like the idea of fighting junk fees and raising costs for the American consumer. He hit that hard. Time after time tonight, he hit the issues that don't just speak to the Democratic base, but that he knows, right? Gun control. He knows reach out to suburban moms, reach out to independent voters and draw them in. So in that sense, it really was a pretty good general election speech. Yeah, it was partisan. I don't think a single person can say it wasn't, but it was partisan in the sense that it was making the case for his reelection, not that it was purely a Democratic speech.
Okay, yeah, I was about to say, why are we saying it was partisan?
Because it was.
Why? Tell me, what's the follow-up? Why? What's the example?
So for the first time that I've ever seen in a State of the Union, just history-wise, we actually have the president knows who his general election candidate is
And he
going
went
to be.
after him.
and that person is the former president of the United States of America.
Yeah.
So I just, like the immediate past.
But who's running for president? He's
Again,
a candidate for the office.
Two things that I think can be true at the same time, but like Donald Trump literally botched the handling of a pandemic that disproportionately but it matters because that is the administration. No, that is the point, though, because that was what directly preceded Joe Biden's administration. What Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have done as president or had to do, what bar they met or what bar they missed, is directly connected to the administration that came before them.
But go back and listen to other speeches, and presidents in their election year do not, even if they don't know who their upcoming opponent is, do not look backwards. They look forward.
I guess.
And so when you're looking backwards at the guy you're running against, yeah, it's going to come off partisan. I mean, that's not a criticism per se. I just
don't agree.
I think,
as he basically said, I mean, tactically it made sense to do what he did, but don't sit here and pretend it was not a partisan.
Look, they don't always go after their opponent, but they do draw contrasts in State of the Union speeches very often. Donald Trump, in his 2020 State of the Union speech, the year of his reelection campaign, went after the radical left in his speech often, right? Drawing a contrast with the other vision.
And that was a partisan point. That's the only point we're making, is that it was a partisan aspect.
My point is, in the State of the Union, the president goes out there to make his case for his agenda, right? That's what presidents do. Oftentimes, one of the best ways to do that is to draw a contrast with the other side's agenda. And I think that's totally legitimate. I'm not saying it was partisan because it's a criticism. I was actually happy seeing him out there tonight making a forceful case that as a Democrat, I sure as hell wish he had been making much sooner in this election.
I'd agree with that part of it because, I mean, that, if nothing else, was for me a critical turning point tonight. For the first time, he almost seemed sort of unfettered a bit. He was kind of relieved to be able to kind of smack some folks around and sort of do the Biden thing the way he likes to do the Biden thing, which I think, Brendan, says a lot about how the Republicans responded. To your point, they always think they have the upper hand until they realize they don't. And there are any number of moments this evening where I think the party in that context, Republicans, should have at least understood the moment enough to stand up and applaud. Oh, I don't know, democracy, fighting cancer, educating children, poor kids. Yeah. But you become so hardened in your response to the guy who's on the stage, and he becomes such the thing in your crosshairs do you think they lose sight of the moment to actually sort of get a little bit close to the guy who's winning the room and win a little bit at the same time?
It's such an insular party. They believe their own talking points so much that it's hard for them to imagine that he could be anything other than just this horrible person.
Yeah.
So it's hard. And the age thing, absolutely. Like, they are absolutely convinced that he can, barely function. But the age thing we should appreciate is not just a Republican invention. Like, poll after poll after poll shows that even Democrats are concerned about his age. And so that was why this was a really important speech. Nothing he said was all that important, let's be honest. How he presented himself politically is much more important. Now, I don't want to overstate that, but in terms of the big takeaway was that he didn't fall flat on his face in a way that the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world were just banking on. They were certain that he was not going to be able to get through that speech and without embarrassing himself.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
No, they really did. No, they really did.
Crazy. This is the third. Joe Biden has been president for the last 3 years. He gave he's given an inaugural address. He takes questions from the press, not as regularly, frankly, as I think that they should be taking questions. Yeah. He has given a joint address to Congress in his first year. This is his second State of the Union. One could argue third if you want to count that joint address. In what universe? Like, what kind of tea were they sipping on to believe that the man couldn't get up there and rise to that occasion? Like, do they want to where's the clips?
Well, it goes back to Brendan's point about just how insular and high on their own supply that they have become, that they believe that was true. And what was particularly striking to me, Mo, was that you had, for all of that sort of nonsense, right, for the circus and the sideshow, you had the president very clear straight out the gate that the stakes are very high here. And as Simone said earlier, you heard echoes of his original campaign, which is crisis at home, crisis and abroad. You need someone day one who is ready to hit the ground running. And so there were both sort of echoes of what we have heard before, but a restating of the case to say, I'm going to make it to you again and tell you that this moment that we find ourselves in, the stakes are even higher than the first time that I made this case to you.
I think that's absolutely right. Look, one thing you can say that I think you can say about Joe Biden with a great deal of confidence is the man is who he is and who he always has been, right? This is a guy who believes in a worldview that he has been arguing for and articulating ever since he first entered public service. And what we saw tonight was him applying that to this moment, right? To this moment, saying the stakes are high. This is who we are as a people. This is who we need to be as a people. And the threats are coming from more places than ever. And what was astonishing to me, going back to this whole issue of the Republican response in the room at the time.
Don't worry, because we'll get to
we'll get to the official
I thought you were going to the kitchen table, Mo.
But in the room was, they wouldn't stand for certain things. And I saw some Republican commentary saying, I can't believe Joe Biden led off with an issue as divisive as Ukraine. You'd think he would have reached out to something that brings us together. And for me, I thought it was crazy that people thought an American president standing up and saying we will not bow down to one of the world's greatest dictators, that they thought that was divisive. And that's where I think you saw two very different approaches to this entire campaign season. Joe Biden is actually reaching out beyond his base. Republicans are only talking to theirs. Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't being a provocateur. She was standing up there because she didn't care how bad it looked to anyone outside of her voters back home in Georgia.